Welcome into the PHNX Coyotes podcast, brought to you by the one and only DraftKings Sportsbook app, America's top-rated sportsbook app. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Leah Merrill here with Steve Peters and Craig Morgan as always, and we are so excited to welcome in a very special guest today. Chris Peters is an NHL draft and prospects analyst for Daily Faceoff, has his own Substack called Hockey Sense, has worked for ESPN, CBS, USA Hockey, and you've been working around prospects since 2008, and prospects is all Coyotes fans want to talk about because There's not a lot to be excited about here in the present. So welcome to the PHNX Coyotes podcast. Chris Peters, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great to be with y'all.
Awesome.
So, Chris, before we begin, and you got the script, so I feel like I shouldn't have let you know that this was coming ahead of time. But I need to ask if it's true that at the U18 World Championship, you almost started an international incident by getting too close to Vladimir Putin, and you had to be surrounded by a security detail.
Wow, I mean, that's a little exaggerated. I certainly felt the chill that would go down my spine as he walked past me. But yeah, at the 2013 World Under 18s, it was in Sochi, and it was essentially the test event for the Olympics. And so the opening game was USA-Russia, packed building in the Bolshoi Ice Dome, and Vladimir Putin was there. And I was doing the streaming broadcast on just very, I mean, we're talking bare bones broadcast kind of thing here. And so I'm bringing in all my equipment. And I got all the Russian Secret Service or the SRG or whatever they are now, not the KGB. I learned that the hard way. That's what it felt like. But yeah, they're lined down the stairs. And then as I'm getting ready to do my broadcast, I feel that little chill go down my spine. And right past me, about 5 feet away, walks, one of the most powerful human beings on the planet Earth at the time. And yeah, it was a weird experience being in Sochi at that time because they were like a year away from the Olympics and they were not close to being ready. The infrastructure in the city was just terrible. It took us an hour to get to the rink every single day, even though it was maybe 2 miles away. So it was incredible to kind of be around that. And then to have Putin walking past me. I mean, I could have spit on him if I wanted to. Like, that's how close he was. I wouldn't have done that because I would have been dead.
You would not be here today.
I would not be talking to you right now. But the other amazing thing about that entire tournament, though, was Connor McDavid's 15-year-old tournament, and he was the MVP at 15 years old. And it was the first time I got to see him live. And it was like, oh, so this is going to be a thing. So, yeah, that was pretty amazing.
So you didn't confront Putin about their foreign policy or the way they were treating dogs at the time?
No, not at that time. I felt like my stature at that moment as web streaming broadcaster for the Under 18 World Championship wasn't going to grant me the gravitas needed for such a situation.
All right. I can relate to that. And I'm not surprised, by the way, that my sources, and you probably know who my source is exaggerating this a bit. And
a little bit.
We'll just go ahead and say it's Corey Prodman, so we'll just call him out.
Yeah, at least rhymes with Corey Prodman for sure.
Yeah. By the way, PD was just talking off the air, but we need to ask on the air, how does one cover hockey from Iowa? From
the hockey hotbed, not Minnesota, not Michigan, upstate New York.
Yeah, well,
Iowa.
Honestly, I'm pretty lucky because, I thought that my career was over. I was at the National Team Development Program, working in there, doing communications and everything. And I liked the job, but my wife is an engineer, and she was, right before we got married, she moved out to Michigan with me and was there. Everything was going great. And 2 months before our wedding, she lost her job. And so she was out of work for like a year, and she's an engineer. So I'm a journalist, do the math there. Right. So she looked for a long time in Michigan and it didn't work out. And she found a great job in Iowa, and where she's from Waterloo, Iowa. And we both went to school at Iowa State. And so I was like, I mean, yeah, we're going to go broke if I keep this up. So she moved out here. And so basically I sat around for a few months, and then I started a blog called United States of Hockey. And that was like just a way to keep me just in the game. I was freelancing. I was making next to no money. I had no idea what to do, but I just knew that, I was miserable without hockey in my life, because I worked with the club team at Iowa State, and I worked, with the NTDP, and I was the Brian Fishman intern at USA Hockey. So I had basically, for the last 6 years had been a full-time hockey person, where I was like doing hockey all the time. So I was pretty miserable sitting in Muscatine, Iowa at the time. And so starting that blog turned out to be life-changing, because then it set me on an entirely new career path. Within a couple of years, I got hired by CBS Sports, and then eventually I became a full-time NHL staff writer for them. And they brought me in initially as a prospect guy to just kind of do draft. They were trying to kind of dabble in a couple of niche kind of areas. And then I eventually moved into the NHL coverage and still covered the draft, not as closely, but still was involved in watching prospects. And then just kind of snowballed from there. And then I lost that job, because that's what happens in media. I was out of work for a while. I was like, okay, I think I'm done in hockey. Started a job at the University of Iowa, working in their communications department. And then Corey Pronman, who you just mentioned, left ESPN to go to The Athletic, and they called me. And I was like, really? And so then I got to work at ESPN for 3 years, and then the pandemic happened. But I've managed to like carve out a career from Eastern Iowa. And it's a long story, but at the same time, it's one I'm really proud of, because I thought I was done in hockey, but if you're passionate about something and you can't give it up, you don't. And I was lucky that I had the support of my wife for years of not making very much money, as a freelancer and as a blogger, an independent blogger at that. And she kept us both afloat. We had kids. She kept the family afloat for a while. And then I was able to turn it into a career. So I feel pretty lucky to be able to do it from here or from anywhere, really.
I will say that, Chris, my wife also grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, so we will have to connect offline, because it's the two Peters guys in the show today both have wives.
That is a small
Waterloo
world.
area.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I feel your pain with the media industry, Chris. As you know, I've been through similar
We don't make money doing this, Craig?
ups and downs in this business. But you actually have some sort of proximity to some NHL markets, to some hockey markets as well. You can go to Minnesota, you can go to Chicago, where you can also watch the Bears if you're so inclined.
Not this year.
Which year, Chris? Which year?
Well, this year in particular was the most painful for me. I made it into about 2 games before I was like, nope, that's it. I can't do it. I cannot do it. And I still don't. I wonder if I'll be able to do it next year. Well, I hope so. But actually, I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up on the south side of the city. My dad was on the Chicago Fire Department, so we lived in the city limits. And I'm told so when the Bears won the Super Bowl, I was 1 year old. However, I'm told that I knew all the lyrics to the Super Bowl Shuffle, and was once brought. My parents went to a fundraiser, and a bunch of the Chicago Bears alumni were there, and they were performing the Super Bowl Shuffle live, and I knew all the words, so they brought me onto the stage apparently, and I was singing with the Bears the Super Bowl Shuffle. No recollection of it, but that's my claim to fame, that I am actually literally part of the shuffling crew.
Wow, you have a few fun facts in your belt there. Putin, that story.
Yeah.
Wow.
If I had constructed a better segue, I would have compared the Bears to the Coyotes. The Bears' eternal search for a quarterback, and the Coyotes' eternal search for a center. But
yeah,
let's get down to some other business first, because I know you've been pretty much an Olympic junkie since they started. You've been watching these games. What are your initial impressions of the men's and women's tournaments? Which players, teams have impressed? Any observations?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been a lot of fun to watch, to be honest. I think it's been way more fun than 2018. I watched all the games in 2018, and I was like, wow, this is bad. This is not good. It's not fun to watch. There's no really compelling element. This year, however, because of the way that it was all thrown together, nobody had time to overthink their rosters. They basically just had to get whoever was available. I do think that some did still overthink their rosters a little bit, where they went heavy in one direction. But the thing that's really been the compelling fact of the men's tournament, and I'll get to the women's too, because that's been compelling as well. The men's tournament is this U.S. team with 15 NCAA players on it has been the best team. And it's not just that I've watched all the teams play. The one that has impressed me the most is the United States. And I'm not just saying that because I'm American. I'm saying it because that's what my eyes are telling me right now. They're the fastest team, and they're probably the most skilled team. And that's because they went with, if you think about it, what's better, a player that's on the cusp of being in the NHL or a player who already had the chance and can't cut it anymore and is in Europe for a reason? And I watch a lot of AHL hockey and I watch a lot of European hockey. And what's the difference between those leagues and the NHL? What's the precision? It's the ability to make those passes, to catch those passes that are bad. The touch on the puck. There's all these different things that kind of come into play. So we're seeing that in this tournament, particularly with Team USA, where their top defenseman is a 19-year-old and Brock Faber, who's playing 25 minutes a game. And their leading scorer is Sean Farrell, who was in the USHL last season. And these are guys that are kind of on the cusp of developing into NHL players. And then Drew Comesso has been their goalie. I think he's been probably the best goalie in the tournament, just in terms of pure technique, skill, everything. I mean, nobody's really come close to him in that regard. But aside from the U.S. team, there's also the parity of this tournament has made it more interesting as well. Denmark is in the quarterfinals. It's their first Olympics ever. And it's not just that they're in the quarterfinals. They deserve to be there. They're one of the better teams. They have a lot of skill. They have, Franz Nielsen and Michael Bodker and players that are actually, can do the job and have done the job. And they've had goaltending too. So that's been amazing. But on the women's side, it's been all about Canada. Canada is, it's remarkable to me that in the last 4 years, Canada has gone from, losing the gold medal in a shootout to being dominant in this tournament. Now, they played the U.S. and they beat the U.S. They got badly outshot. That was also their second of a back-to-back game. And they showed some of that fatigue. The U.S. was coming off a day of rest, and then they owned the shot chart, but they didn't have the same level of skill. So I think the Canadians are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. They've dominated. Now, that doesn't matter in a 1-versus-1, in this gold medal game that's coming up between the two teams that we always anticipated. But I've been definitely concerned with what I've seen from the U.S. and they lost so many players from the last time around to retirement, or in Brandon Decker's case, injury on the first 10 minutes of the tournament. And that's shown. That lack of depth has shown. Canada is a deeper team at this point, and they also have better goaltending. So I think it's going to be a fantastic final because these two teams always bring it and they raise the level of the game. But I think that, if we're looking at it objectively, Canada looks far superior on paper.
One thing, Chris, when you look at the World Junior Tournament, there's always a guy that everybody knows who the big players are in the World Junior Tournament. It's similar here in the Olympics. Similar. Are there names of guys that are going to get a look? Is there somebody that's going to be? We talked about Aaron Ness, who was in this program for a very long time with the Coyotes. He's playing over there. Is there somebody that's going to get another look by an NHL club, either that hasn't played North American hockey before, or has, that we thought maybe we checked out? Andy Mealy, Aaron Ness, guys that our fans would be familiar with. Is there somebody out there that's kind of on the radar now because of the Olympic tournament?
I mean, if I'm an NHL team and I'm looking right now and I'm seeing the way that Steven Kampfer is playing for Team USA, that's a guy that I would say, hey, we might need to bring him back. We might need to bring him back. He's playing the KHL this year. He had, one of his most productive seasons. He's on Team USA's top power play unit. And I wasn't sure what to expect from him. I wasn't sure what to expect from any of the veteran defensemen. But he's been really good. I think Brian Cooper, who plays in Sweden and was a one-time Anaheim Ducks draft pick and played at Nebraska Omaha and was a really good USHL player. He's looked really good. I didn't have him anywhere on my radar that he was going to make this team, but he's basically been kind of their number 4 in terms of minutes, and in some games they're number 3. And he's played really well. He defends. He's physical. He's not very big, but he's been able to close on pucks. So those are guys that kind of keep an eye on. But really, I think this tournament has been about the younger players, and there are some guys that are not NHL affiliated yet. Juraj Slafkovsky, who's draft eligible this year, has been amazing for Slovakia. Simon Nemec, unfortunately, he didn't get a shift today against Germany, so I'm not sure exactly where he stands on Slovakia's roster, but he's a top young player. And then the U.S. has three undrafted free agents. One is Strauss Mann, the goaltender who got the win against Canada. The others are Ben Myers, who I think is going to be the biggest college free agent this year and is going to have a line around the block to sign him. And he has been one of USA's best forwards and most consistent forwards in this tournament. And then also Mark McLaughlin, who didn't play in the last game, but he's a very speedy, gritty player who could be a fourth line guy in the NHL. He was the Hockey East defensive forward of the year last year. And this year he's been over a point per game player for Boston College. So those are the guys that are names to know specifically on the U.S. I'm sure there are a couple like, Josh Hosang has kind of fallen down the lineup for Canada. I think a lot of people expected more from him in this tournament with his skill level. But there are probably a couple of guys in Canada. I don't think this has necessarily been the best audition for Eric Stahl to try and get back into the NHL. He just did score his first goal of the tournament today against China. The pace, I think, is eating him up a little bit in some of these games. And but still, I mean, you look at a veteran guy like that, a guy who played so well in the playoffs last year, there's certainly an opportunity for him. I'm sure there are teams that are at least considering it. The possibility of having him in their mix for a postseason run once they have the ability.
So you talked about some young players, and as people who follow the Coyotes, there's some names on all of our radars, and those names primarily Shane Wright, but very recently you came out with your midseason draft ranking and had Logan Cooley ahead of Shane Wright. So what changed? What can you tell us about Logan Cooley? Because I think Coyotes fans are very familiar with Shane Wright, but maybe not as familiar with Logan Cooley. So what led to that decision in that ranking, and what can you tell us about Logan Cooley?
Sure. Yeah. So it's been a hard year to get a gauge. I think the important thing before I get into Logan Cooley, just to mention about Shane Wright, he didn't play last season. He had the under-18 World Championship. That's all he had. I think this year you've seen the lack of progression from year to year, and that has been my biggest concern. So with that, I think if you say, okay, well, I'm going to take the consensus guy, I've been thinking a lot about that, about the years where we had a consensus, where we knew who the number one was. And I think, you look, how often has that actually come to bear out? I think the most recent example is the Rasmus Dahlin draft year. If you could do that draft over right now, I would imagine that most teams are going to pick Andrei Svechnikov first over Rasmus Dahlin. And all of us in the public, except for I think one person, had Rasmus Dahlin as the number one guy. So I wanted to make sure that I was challenging myself to make sure that I didn't just get lazy and feel like he's the guy. And so as I watched more and more of Shane Wright's games versus Logan Cooley's games, what I saw was a more dynamic player in Logan Cooley, a faster player, a guy who plays the game at NHL pace now, who was a number 2 center for USA at the World Juniors before it got shut down, who's producing over almost 1.5 points per game at the National Team Development Program, who's been one of the best players against NCAA teams this year because they play that mixed schedule. And I think Shane Wright is an elite prospect. I think he's going to help whoever drafts him. And there's a good chance he's going number one. I think a lot of people were mad at me for putting Logan Cooley number one, not because they don't believe that I did the work, but because Shane Wright, if you are one of the last place teams, you want a no doubt first round pick. You want a no doubt first overall. And there are enough people out there, and I have heard from NHL teams that do not have Shane Wright as their number one overall on their board right now. Mm-hmm. And so I waited. I normally in years past when I was at ESPN, I would ask I would ask a lot of NHL scouts. I have a pretty large network of NHL scouts that I trust that I would to give me an honest opinion of players. I decided not to use that for my midterm because I wanted it to stand. I wanted my own opinion to stand on its own. I didn't want it to get clouded. And in doing that, there's a lot of risk because, so after I finished and even before I finished and actually published it, I started looking at the public list, like the Bob McKenzie list, which is kind of the gold standard for what the industry thinks. At least it gives you a better idea of what scouts are thinking. Whereas, and that's what differentiates the people like me from what Bob does, is that we're using our opinion. He's using the opinion of the scouts, which is a great way to find out how the draft is going to go. I'm trying to tell you how I think it should go. But I think just to get back to the two players in question, I think what it came down to for me when I made that final decision is, what are the things that make a number one center? And do I think either of these two guys can be it? I think they both can be. I don't think either is a lock. And I don't think we have a lock number one center in this draft class. And so for me, my preference is hockey sense, skating, dynamic elements. Shane Wright has the hockey sense. He's a fine skater. He's not as good as a Logan Cooley. He's not as fast as Logan Cooley. His vision is very comparable. I think, the thing that separated Logan Cooley from Shane Wright is he's the more dynamic, faster player at this point. Okay, so at this moment, I think Leah's about to roll in the dark clouds that we use sometimes for depressing shows, because you've depressed the entire Coyotes
Exactly.
that you just said. What we need to know here, Chris, well, you've already alluded to this a little bit. Could either of these guys, it doesn't sound like either of these guys is a franchise center. Can one of these guys be a number one center? Because quite frankly, the Coyotes will take other at this point. It's been 20 plus years. It's really since Jeremy Roenick that the Coyotes had a true number one center. Yeah, that's a long time. And I'll tell you what, so I think both of them absolutely could round out into franchise. I think Shane Wright has a little bit more potential maybe to round out as that, kind of do everything Patrice Bergeron center, but he's not there yet. And I haven't seen a guy that has played like a clear number one this year. So I think that both of them have that potential to be special. I think Logan Cooley is very much in the Jack Hughes vein, where it's speed, it's dynamic, it's making plays that other players can't with pace. Those are the types of things that I think matter for him. So I do think that they could be potential impact guys and franchise centers. It's just that this year and this draft, I think it's become less and less easy to figure that out. Who really can be that defining guy? And I think last year we looked at 2 years ago, looking at Alexis Lafreniere and saying, well, this guy can be a franchise altering player. And he comes in and, he's still got a lot of growth to go, but he's been so far from what was expected. And this is another guy that lost significant time, playing time and development time before his first NHL season. So the other thing that I think all teams have to consider at this point, with the way that the pandemic has impacted leagues below the NHL, we just saw Owen Power go back, and I think that should be a precedent-setting thing. Shane Wright has not dominated the OHL this year. Yeah, if he's not, and whoever drafts him is going to put him in the NHL next year, no question. And if they do that, they run the risk of having an Alexis Lafreniere situation. Jack Hughes took a long time to round out. Capo Caco, still waiting to see him take that next step. So it's getting more difficult for teams to have that guy that's going to jump in right away. So that's what you kind of have to consider. There are so many factors, and I think if you're a team like the Coyotes, you can't make a mistake on this number one pick. If you do get it, you're in a better position at number two to you don't have that hard decision to make. It should be easy. I think that I'm not, obviously it's just my opinion, but I don't think there's anybody close to Cooley or Wright at number two. So that's just my opinion. I know there are people that don't have Cooley in their top five, but that's me. So, but I don't think it's particularly close. So either way, unfortunately, 2023 is the year to be the worst team ever. So that's what it comes down. Before I let Petey jump in here, you talked about the impact of COVID. I don't know if you've gotten a sense from scouts, from development people. Is that something that can be made up, or is that something that's going to be impacting these players for the rest of their careers, that lost year or year plus? It's going to take a lot more work, and I think it's going to take teams identifying where those deficiencies or those missed opportunities were. I also think it's going to take a little more patience on the part of all the teams to allow these guys the time to make up some of that ground. Like in Lafreniere's case, the QMJHL season gets shut down in his draft year. He doesn't play for about 6 months. This was at the beginning of the pandemic when we couldn't do anything anywhere. And then the first thing that he gets to do is he goes into an NHL training camp, and then he's playing NHL games. It's just that was not conducive to a positive environment for him. And then also the Rangers had their whole mess of we got to fire everybody and we got to make the change behind the bench and all this other stuff. So that didn't help matters there. But I don't think that anybody that had this lost time is a lost cause, because development is never linear. It's never in a straight line, and it's never going to be, something that is easy to predict. But it's something that with enough patience, with enough work, you can make up the ground that was lost. And I think that that's going to be on the players and themselves to do that, but it's also going to be on the teams to identify what needs to be done.
Chris, I have to say, this has been a roller coaster so far, because first it was, there's not an elite franchise changing center, then maybe it's best to be number 2. So I don't even know what I want anymore.
Way to go, Coyote fans.
But that's just being a Coyotes fan. So
it can never be easy.
Yeah, no, it's really not. We have a lot more to get to. This has been really great so far. But before we move on, I just want to talk to everybody about the DraftKings Sportsbook app. And there's a new promotion now that the Super Bowl is done going on at DraftKings. So new customers who sign up for the DraftKings Sportsbook app using the promo code PHNX and bet $1 on any NBA team can get $150 in free bets if that team wins. If you're already a customer, you can bet on the NBA with same game parlays. We've been talking about the Olympics. You can also bet on the Olympics. So tons of stuff you can do on DraftKings. So be sure to check it out. Use the promo code PHNX, bet $1 on any NBA team, get $150 in free bets if that team wins. That's 21 and over, Arizona only. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for more details.
Chris, I'm going to go in a different direction here. And this is, I don't want Coyote fans to be frustrated, but you've already alluded to what the center position could be. And this is the problem with the NHL draft as a whole. When you're drafting 17 and 18-year-olds, you just don't know. And one thing that's always bothered me here, specifically in Arizona, is everybody goes back 5 years and goes, oh, you guys missed on that pick. The Coyotes missed on this pick. Well, you blew it with this one. I'm going to take you back to 2015. Arguably the best player in the world right now, Connor McDavid, gets drafted. Consensus number 1. Consensus, Eichel's a nice player, but McDavid's the guy. Going to change your franchise, going to bring you cups, all of those things. Coyotes lose the ping pong balls again, sit at 3rd. So here in Arizona, it's always, well, Dylan Strome was a terrible pick. Look at all Mikko Rantanen, Marner, Hanifin came after. Can you take us back to 2015 at that time of the draft when we're talking about 17-year-old players? Dylan Strome was the guy. Like he was the guy that was going to be picked 3rd in that mix. So revisionist history is easy now to go look at, oh my gosh, look at all these guys that got drafted. But at that time, wasn't Dylan Strome the next in line?
Yeah, I mean, depending on who you ask, it was really between Strome and Marner. I think that was where it went. And at that point I was working at CBS and I didn't have a full pre-draft ranking, but I did a lot of work around that draft. And so you look at Strome's numbers from his draft season and really from subsequent seasons, and you're saying, wow, this is a special talent. This is a guy that has high-end hockey sense, elite vision. He's a tremendous playmaker. He's got size at the center position. He's going to be a really solid player. Now, everybody knew at that same time, though skating was an issue. That's not going to be his strong suit. But look at the brain on this kid. Look at the way that he plays. I think, and you're exactly right, Steve. Like you have to judge it based on the information that was available at the time. Because we'll do redrafts and all those things that we do as prospect writers, and it makes people look bad. But I always try to emphasize this wasn't a mistake. It didn't look like a mistake at the time. When I'm grading the draft for the Coyotes, I'd have to go back and look at my grades, but I'm pretty sure I gave him an A, for getting Dylan Strome. And I could have been Marner, could have been Strome. Now, that was also a year where I was super high on Noah Hanifin. I thought Noah Hanifin was going to be the next big thing. And it was kind of between him and Zach Werenski and Ivan Provorov as the top defenseman. Well, turns out Zach Werenski ended up being the best defenseman of that group. And and I think there were, if I remember correctly, at one point I even had Hanifin, even though I didn't do a straight ranking, I had Hanifin ahead of Strome and Marner, which would have made me look awful. If that was the way that it went, even though Noah Hannafin's an everyday NHL defenseman and pretty good player, that's not the type of guy you want at number 4. So I was a big believer in Dylan Strome. I actually wrote when I was still at ESPN, when it was kind of like make or break for him. When he did end up getting traded, I said, this is going to be right before he got traded, rather. I said, this is the year where it's going to start to come together for him a little bit. And, it came together to a certain degree, but still he hasn't been that consistent. And where's the disconnect? I think part of it is in development. Part of it is in the decisions that are made after the draft. Part of it is on him. There's all those different things that kind of come into play. And the Coyotes have had such a strange history with some of their prospects. I go back to the Kyle Turris situation and different things like that, where those frustrations build up. And some of those are self-inflicted. Some of those are on the player. Some of them, there are all these different things. And so often, the worst thing about doing the prospect work that I've learned is that so often it is just coming down to luck and situation. There's not, there's sometimes you can make the perfect pick and it's just not the right situation. It's not the right fit. And so, yeah, but I agree completely. I don't think that Dylan Strome at the time was a miss. It made complete sense. There was a razor thin margin between him and Mitch Marner. If you pick Mitch Marner, does it change the course of your franchise? Maybe not. It's hard to know what he would look like outside of Toronto at this point. So
yeah, and that's the thing too. You mentioned development, and that's a key piece here that I think often gets overlooked. And we know what the Coyotes' situation has been like financially for a very long time. When the league owned them, when subsequent ownership groups owned them, there wasn't enough invested in those areas, in my opinion, and that can really impact a player right off the hop, and you may never recover from something like that. So who knows? If Dylan Strome gets drafted by another team that has a great development system, maybe we're talking about an entirely different player at this point. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I mean, it's easy to look back now and say, wow, if we only got Marner, if we only got Werenski, if we only got, there are a lot of different things, but there's also a lot of other teams that are asking themselves those same questions. So just the way it goes.
Not in 2015, Chris.
Yeah, no.
Coyotes came away with 3 first-round picks, and that ultimately, and then you look at the names that went in the first round, even the second round, guys like Sebastian Aho, they didn't get any of those guys.
Nope.
Well, in this draft, the Coyotes have a ton of picks. We can take a look here. There's 8 picks just in the first 2 rounds. What can the Coyotes accomplish in this draft? You mentioned that this draft class isn't quite as deep maybe as people originally thought. What with all of these picks, I mean, there's so many. What can the Coyotes accomplish? Please give us some hope.
I will give you some hope, because I think that the most important thing that the Coyotes did in the Bill Armstrong era is the people that they brought in on the scouting side. I mean, you have just given an elite scouting staff a ton of bullets to use, and it's we sometimes joke about draft picks being magic beans. You want to have more of them, because then there's more of a chance that you can grow more magic beanstalks, hopefully. But what I would say is with having Ryan Jankowski, Daryl Plandowski, the Skis, having them in the mix in that decision process, and then Bill Armstrong, who made his bread and butter on the draft and who is one of the great talent evaluators in the league. That is a huge thing that can happen. Now, this draft, I think, is closer to average, but there have been a lot of average drafts that have produced big picks, like guys that can make a difference. And I think that if you have invested in the scouting, if you've invested in the processes the processes that you go through to make picks, having all those picks is huge. And the other thing that you can do with that stockpile, especially those many second round picks, which I think second round picks are tremendous trade assets. A lot of teams will find guys that they have high on their list that falls into the second round that suddenly they want. And then you've got the pick that you can, and you have the surplus of picks to provide to get something that you want. So I think that there are when you have that stockpile of picks, you have so many different options. And I think in this year's draft, while it is average, there's value to be found. There are guys that in this draft that I think have high upside that are going to be big time players that will find a way and will impact your organization. Will you find your best player? Maybe, maybe not. It's really hard to say at this point with this class. I think that, we're still learning about, you look at any of the players across the OHL right now, and you're like, is this really what he is? Or is it because he missed a year? Those types of questions are still being asked. I personally feel that this year's draft is harder to do than last year's draft. And that was without the OHL playing at all. So there's just there are so many guys in this year's draft that just didn't play anywhere last year or didn't have the right situation. There's a lot of re-entries and things like that. So I would say that if you're an organization like the Coyotes and you've invested in your scouting, which they have, that's a really important thing. And I think that they're well positioned to take advantage of this stockpile.
Yeah, we're talking, and those 8 picks will likely all come in the first 50 of the NHL draft, which is just insane to think about.
It is. And that's a great place to be because the drop off is pretty dramatic. Like I only did my
Well,
top
you mentioned
50,
after 60, right?
Yeah, usually. Yeah. I mean, really the drop off, I think in any draft is usually in the 20s. I mean, really, because you start getting into the maybe nots. Like that's where, the late first round, the early second round. But that's also where the good scouting staffs have been able to find players that make an impact.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Coyote scouting staff. I completely agree with you. I've been around for all the other scouting staffs, and most of it has been a matter of some resources. They just haven't had the money to invest. But when Bill came in, he really convinced this ownership group that that's where they needed to start. And they listened. This is without question the best scouting staff I've ever seen here. So that's really encouraging. Again,
and is it the biggest too? It's got to be the biggest,
yes,
right?
Is.
I mean,
there's so much experience, which is so important in this business too. There's so much experience on this staff. So we'll see what they can do, but at least they have invested in the right area. I wanted to ask you on that front, and we don't even know what's going to happen at the trade deadline if they're going to acquire more assets. My suspicion is that if Bill gets more assets, he's going to try and push them out to future years to keep that pipeline coming. But how difficult is it for a staff to execute 8 picks in the first 50?
Not that hard if you've worked really hard on your list. If you are confident in your list and you just get to pick right off the list, it's not that hard. I think the teams, the one thing that having that many picks allows you to do is it does allow you to take a couple of swings earlier than you might have otherwise taken. Because you said, okay, well, we've got that. But again, that comes down to, did you build your list in that way to, is there a guy that you have, well, we really like his ceiling, so we're going to rank him a little higher than maybe the consensus would suggest we should, which they've done in the past with other players too, Victor Soderstrom. That's, those are kind of some of the things where it just kind of comes down to how the work that goes into it on the front end. I mean, so they've already had their mid-season scouting meetings. They have their board at this point. That's going to change in the coming weeks and months. Then their next meeting, it'll change again. And you just go through that process. And if you're comfortable in the process that you've put together, it really isn't that hard in the end.
I think you're on mute.
Muted. You're muted, PD.
See, that's what I do. I'm clearly a professional here, Chris. I muted because I didn't want to step on you here. Here's my concern. And I don't want to be a pessimist. Actually, I do, because if you listen to our show every day, I'm moderately negative. Go back again. I'm going to go back to 2015 again. And here's a team, the Boston Bruins, have 3 picks in the first 15. And you go, oh, this is going to turn the franchise around. Boston Bruins, they're going to be back to the Stanley Cup points. Here we go. Bruins, 3 high picks. And they don't. And I don't want to say swing and a miss, because that's not fair. I mean, Jake DeBrusk has become an everyday player for that team, and he's a role player that helps a team win. I like Jake DeBrusk a lot. The other 2 players, don't become players. So I understand what the Coyotes has done. They've done a great job, and Bill Armstrong's done a fantastic job of getting these assets. Difficult, and he held out and did things with Kemper, and all great. But there's no guarantee that there's a long way to go. So I just want to make sure the fans in Coyote country understand that this is no guarantee. There's a lot of work to be done for this. Do you remember that, Jeff, and when Boston went through that with those 3 picks?
I do. And I remember my jaw hitting the floor when they first said Jacobs Borrell. And I was like, what? Then they said Jake DeBrusk. And I was like, better. And then they said Zach Shenishin, and I said, what? And so
are they trying to be smarter than other people? Are scouts at that point going, hey, we found somebody that nobody else in the whole world knows about, even though everybody has access to the exact same information? We're just smarter than you.
I think there are a couple of important factors there. I think, at least one of those picks was acquired on draft day. I think the one of them was from the Milan Lucic trade. Actually, two of them may have been acquired on that draft day. So you're going into it with a completely different draft strategy at that point after you've acquired those picks. I think that this is a situation. The Zaboral pick, I think, was a need-based pick where he was ranked highly because of where he is, what position he plays, rather. And yeah, I mean, like, the amazing thing is the best player that came out of that draft they got in the second round in Brandon Carlo. So kind of crazy.
Petey, no, you can just keep being negative, Petey, if you want to take that role on the show. We're used to that.
I know.
Just let me ask you, let me combine these two things. As we've talked about already, this draft was once described as one of the better drafts as of the millennium, and a lot of opinions have changed on it. You now rank it as average to maybe below average. Why do you say that? And then tell us what you think are the strengths of this draft, whether it's in skills or positions.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at a draft, I think the most important element of a draft is what it looks like at the top in terms of how I rank it. And this year I felt there's no, we knew there was no Connor McDavid. But then there's also the fact that Shane Wright has underperformed based on expectations. And like I said, I still think he's an elite prospect. It's a big draft for the US, so that's nice. But I think because of, Ontario is down, and the WHL has some guys, Matt Savoy, Connor Geeky, both on one team, and some defensemen in the draft. But it's a terrible goalie draft, so there's not a lot of positional, excitement like last year we had. Well, we know we have at least two elite goaltenders. We have, a top tier defenseman. We have a top tier center. So that there are those things, and I just think there are fewer kind of flashpoint players in this draft where you could say this is the guy. And I think part of the problem is we also are getting caught looking ahead to 2023, and we're seeing Connor Bedard, Matvei Michkov, Adam Fantilli, Charlie Stramel, who is just coming back from an injury, and I think could be a superstar in the league, and nobody's really talked about him for 2023. I feel like there's more there, and there's nothing wrong with an average draft. Plenty of great players come out of an average draft. It's not going to be, like the 2001 draft or the Sedin draft, where basically it was like the Sedins and that was kind of it coming out of their draft. So I think there are going to be some players there, but I just think we too often label drafts 2 to 3 years out, and things change so much in that span.
We have quite a few questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. But just first, I want to take a moment to tell everyone about our newest partner, who I've talked about before, but I'm really excited about it because I've been using this product every single day.
I think Chris was drinking some just now.
Maybe
that's what he's got going.
Exactly. I had
no idea what's coming.
So many supplements that I would take every day. It would take forever. But now I take Athletic Greens because with one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens to help you start your day right. It's a no-brainer. It supports better sleep quality and recovery. It has over 7,000 five-star reviews, and it costs you less than $3 a day, and you're investing in your health. I drink it while I'm brewing my coffee. It's part of my morning routine now. So it's a really, really great product. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/coyotes. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/coyotes to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. You just mentioned that not any goalies in this draft, because one of the questions was any goalies worth looking at in this draft. Is there any goalie or not really, or maybe it'll be one of those where we look back and say, oh, who knew?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyler Brennan is the consensus top goalie in this draft, out of the WHL. And basically, yeah, there's just not depth. There's really no depth at the position this year. There's certainly guys that you can look at in the later stages of the draft. Late round guys that you could probably get, like a Brett Brochu from London Knights, who's going through the draft his third time, but he's a 5'11" goalie. Those guys really have a hard time. But I mean, you look at UC Saros right now, and I'm not saying he's going to be the next UC Saros, but I think that they're at least giving more teams a reason to look at goaltenders at that size. But, I think Brennan came into the year as a potential first-round guy just because he was so far and away, that has the most potential. But he hasn't necessarily played up to a level where you'd say, oh, well, that guy's definitely a first-rounder. In fact, he might not even be a second-rounder. And so in terms of high-end goalies, I don't see a ton. That's one where, that to me, that's the position that's most intriguing to potentially acquire via trade, and maybe find a young goalie or a young free agent that you can bring in, because I think especially in the position that the Coyotes are in right now, I don't think anybody that you get in this draft would be a very long-term project. So I think that those assets would probably be better served in other places.
And then another question, with all those second-round picks, should the Coyotes try to draft players that already play well together with their respective team, or should they try to get the best players left? Which kind of asks another question that we had is, do scouts and GMs draft the best player available, or do they draft the player that best suits their need?
Yeah, so this is always an interesting conversation, because just to answer the best player available thing, they will always draft the best player available, but that's the best player available as far as they're concerned. There is no consensus. Like in the NFL, they'll say, well, we're going for the best player available, and we're getting a star running back. We're getting the number one ranked running back, and all that stuff. And you can kind of point to that. That doesn't exist in hockey. And so teams are going to build their boards in such a way where they may weight defensemen. They say, hey, we'd like to find some defensemen. We're going to weight them a little differently versus the forwards on our list, because we think we need it to get it. I do think that draft boards can change over the course of a draft, and teams will react to that occasionally. But in general, they're going to go for the best player available, but that's different for every single team. So it's really, you can't get the best player available off of Bob McKenzie's board. That's just not how it works.
And then another question, do you think it's better to keep all those picks or bundle some of them to pick higher? Maybe not in this draft, but maybe the 2023, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, generally it's not favorable to trade up. Losing assets, losing bullets in the draft, not ideal. Unless there's a player that you are so sold on that he is the guy that you feel you are guaranteed, and that player at one point was like a Victor Soderstrom. That was the guy they really desperately wanted to have. At the time, my feeling on that pick was completely altered by the assets given up to acquire that pick. And I mean, I believe the second round pick ended up becoming Bobby Brink, who is right now one of the top scorers in college hockey, and that as a second round pick. And, I think that in general, you're better to have both of those picks than to trade up. So that's not a hard and fast rule, though, because like I said, if there is a player out there that you feel so confident in that you need to have that player, then trade up for him. But and then that is one thing that I did say about just basically that pick is like, you got to give them credit for shooting their shot and wanting that guy bad enough that they were willing to make that move. But I think in general, the data has shown that you're going to probably have more success trading back than you are trading up.
Another question here. When you draft that high, can you bake someone longer to encourage development in the O or the American League, or is that problematic? And that also ties into another question that I just have that I know Coyotes fans will want to know, because the Coyotes' #1 pick last year, Dylan Guenther, has been in the Canadian Hockey League. So what do you think about, it's kind of a twofold question, just the development aspect for having players stay in their minor leagues, and what do you think of Dylan Guenther's development so far, if you have been paying attention to his play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is, I have never seen a player stay too long in one place. I think there have been times where a guy gets a little stale in junior, but that usually doesn't impact their development negatively. What fans, and to answer the question too initially, because I think it's really important, is if you are a team that is, doesn't cave to the pressure of playing your top pick right away, then you are doing a good job, because you are doing right by the player. You're not just putting a player in there because you need to juice up the fan base and give them something to look forward to. Because if you put that guy in there and he's not ready, it could completely ruin him. Like, I mean, I think, I hate to, continue to use examples of past administrations, but I mean, the Barrett Hayton decision was horrible for his development. He wasn't ready. He was good, but he wasn't ready. I know that, I think the Sioux Greyhounds expected to get him back, and when they didn't, they were surprised. That's not usually a good thing. If that team is like, oh, because they're going to know better than anybody. And some of it is biased, where it's like, oh, we just want this player because he's really good. But, that was one where I think that in the end, and that's, again, we have the benefit of hindsight. If you go off of his World Junior, you thought he was going to be one of the best prospects in the world. Right. And he could be. He could have been. And he still might be a really great NHL player over the course of the year, but now he's kind of set back. So I think in general, with the CHL rule, I love that this year they allowed players that played in the AHL last year during the pandemic season to stay if the teams felt that was best for their development. So it allowed guys like Quentin Byfield, and there's a Donovan Sabrango playing for Detroit. He's in their AHL for a second straight season. So Cole Perfetti. So they gave those guys that opportunity to stay, and that turned out to be very beneficial for them, because it's a really hard league to play in if you're 18 and 19 years old. So numbers can go any which way, but I think in general, like especially with Dylan Guenther, Craig and I were talking about this before the season. I said, if they have him on their roster this season, they have done him a huge disservice. And I didn't think that this administration was going to do that. The Armstrong was going to do that, and certainly they did. They sent him back, which is disappointing if you're a fan, because you want to see this new shiny thing, and it's they do. Prospects absolutely goose optimism. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks have been doing that for like every year for a couple of years, where it's like, we got a new prospect to show you, and then it's Brock Besser and Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, and then it's like, oh wow, this is great, but where are they now? They're still not where they want to be. And so I think that's patience is a virtue, and especially in player development. If you rush it, it's more often than not, you're not going to get the best results. You might get good results, but you're not going to get the best results.
And I do get the sense, like you said, about this administration, that they're not going to make that mistake that has been made so often here in the past. Dovetailing off that, I want to ask you one question. I know Petey has one as well, and then we'll let you go. Are you a proponent of raising the draft age? And what is your general sense of how scouts and executives feel around the league about the same question?
Yeah, it's very mixed. And I feel very conflicted on it, because I think on one side we do try to rush these guys a little too much, and that they could use that extra year. And it would open things up in terms of, maybe more players decide to go to college for a year or two, or maybe some players decide that they want to do, go to Europe or whatever. There should still be options available to them. I think in general though, scouting has gotten so much better. They don't miss as nearly as much as they used to. I think player development has grown leaps and bounds in the last 15 years in particular, where there has been a huge investment. I mean, every prospect in the system has a dedicated staff person that is watching them all the time, that is keeping up with them, that is calling them weekly, that is getting them video, that is work. So all of those things are contributing to a better system in place. So quite frankly, I think the way that it is now, it works fine. I also think there should be the opportunity for an 18-year-old individual to play professionally if they're ready, and if there's the Connor McDavids and the Austin Matthews and whoever else, I think that they're the guys that certainly could. But if you look at it, if we had that extra year of data, the drafting would get better, because I've seen a lot of guys in their post-draft year really take giant steps forward. Just to use a recent example, Matt Boldy from last night gets a hat trick for the Minnesota Wild, and that's a guy that had a really good college season. Tough start. His freshman year was a tough start, but then he finished strong. Then he came back the next year. He was elite, and he goes. If he didn't get hurt in training camp, he would have been right away on the NHL roster. So I think that there you could make a case for the 19-year-old draft, but I think that as it is right now, and quite frankly, I mean, I think if you're a team that's doing their work, they're going to have, be watching these guys multiple years already. I don't necessarily think that adding a third to that, is because most of them they'll start watching them in their draft -1 season, just to get notes on them. And then move on. So I don't know if adding another year to that process necessarily is going to make a dramatic difference. If nothing else, it slows everything down, and it might make players and teams a little more patient in how they work with players.
Okay, Chris, we've gone over a lot of topics over the last hour, a lot of leagues, a lot of players, a lot of history. So for Arizona Coyote fans that are in the middle of this horrific rebuild that is very difficult and painful, and we may be doing it for years, guys, just hang in there.
Yeah.
Can you just give us just a quick hitter, the 3 names that Coyotes fans, I got my pen out because I'm not going to have to do my homework now. I'll just cheat off of you. I've got my pen. Give us the 3 names at the top of this list that Coyote fans, even if the balls don't bounce in their favor, give us the 3 names that Coyotes fans need to know for this summer.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think clearly Shane Wright. I mean, he's still he'll go no lower than second. I mean, I think that if he'll probably go first, he's going to go no lower than second. He can be a difference-making player. He's a highly intelligent guy, physically ready, could probably gain a step and a little more explosiveness, but elite shot, all the great things that he does. Logan Cooley is electric. I think that you look at, I always loved Clayton Keller, been a fan of Clayton Keller from the beginning. I thought that he was one of the best NTDP players I ever saw. And I think that Cooley has been even better, even though his numbers aren't going to look as good as Keller's did. I think that his speed and electric, there's just an electricity about him. And then the other guy that has not had an amazing year, but I think is really the highest upside forward, potentially the highest upside forward in this draft, is Ivan Miroshnichenko from Russia. He was actually supposed to come to Muskegon. He was going to go on the exact path of Andrei Svechnikov. He's going to go to the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL. So for some reason, his visa was declined during the pandemic, so he has to stay in Russia. He's playing in Omsk, and I'm really concerned about what that means for his development, because he's been playing in their second division pro league where he's been pretty good, but he's powerful. He skates fast. He's got skill. He's just got all kinds of elements to him, and he was a top player at the World Under 18s. And so if you get him, and then you get Matvei Michkov, you might have like the Ovechkin, Malkin of their time, potentially, if you can get both of them in the subsequent draft. So those are the guys that I've zeroed in on as my top 3. But those are, that's certainly, I don't think there's a consensus after 1 at this point. And I broke the consensus with my rankings. So you can just kind of go with whatever you feel is best. But I think that those guys are the 3 that I've really zeroed in on. And I think that if you get any one of them, you're going to have an elite player in your system.
Well, Chris, we can't thank you enough for joining us. I feel like I've taken a lot away. We probably could have kept going for another hour. But we will be talking a ton about prospects in the draft going forward into these next few months, because that's what there is for Coyotes fans to look forward to. And thank you to everyone in the chat who sent in their questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. Again, I'm sure we'll be hopefully talking to Chris again before July.
Yeah, we need to have you back on, Chris.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sure.
This is a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And I'm super jealous of Petey's jersey collection back there. So,
right.
Yeah, I need that Team North America. And I'd sneak into your house and steal that. Peter's Law. So, yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, you can read Chris's writing at dailyfaceoff.com. That's where the midseason rankings and all of that is. You can also follow Chris on Twitter is it Chris M Peters? Is that what it is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
M.
And your Substack is still going, right?
Yes.
Substack. Yep. Hockey Sense, hockeysense.substack.com, and Talking Hockey Sense podcast, wherever your podcasts are downloaded.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So if you're listening and you want to know more about prospects and all of that, check all of those things out. And also be sure to check out gophnx.com. Craig and Petey were out at ASU's new multi-purpose arena yesterday. So there's video at PHNX _sports on Twitter, as well as at PHNX _Coyotes. We'll probably touch more on the arena stuff tomorrow in our audio only episode. So be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcast, to PHNX Coyotes. Check out Craig's arena story and exclusive interview with Javier Gutierrez as well at gophnx.com. Become a member today. Get a shirt from the PHNX locker. Petey's wearing his purple one, the red one's in the back. And there's a new incredible Sun shirt. So check all of that out. We'll be back tomorrow with an audio episode, Thursday at 12:30 live, a special French Bulldog edition of the show. That should be a lot of fun. So stay tuned this week. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks again, Chris, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Bye.